At my own wedding reception, my mother stood up in front of 200 guests and announced, "We're cutting Mia from the family will for marrying beneath us. This man will never be worthy of our bloodline." She pointed directly at my husband, calling him a nobody from nowhere who had tricked her precious daughter into settling for less. The entire ballroom went silent as she declared that I was officially disinherited, effective immediately for choosing love over legacy. What she didn't know was that my nobody husband had been quietly sitting next to his business partner all evening, the same business partner who owned the investment firm that controlled 60% of my family's real estate empire. The same partner who had been evaluating whether to renew their contracts. The same man who had just witnessed my mother publicly humiliate her own daughter on what should have been the happiest day of her life. Here's how one wedding toast destroyed a family fortune and taught everyone in that room never to judge a book by its cover. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Hi, I'm Mia Thornton, and 3 months ago I thought I was marrying the love of my life in front of family and friends who cared about my happiness. I was wrong about the family part. The Grandmont Ballroom was everything I had dreamed of for my wedding reception. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in ivory silk, and the scent of white roses filled the air. My dress, a vintage-inspired gown with delicate lace sleeves, felt perfect as I moved between tables, thanking guests for celebrating with us. My husband Alden looked handsome in his navy suit, his eyes lighting up every time our gazes met across the room. For the first 2 hours, everything was magical. The ceremony at St. Catherine's Chapel had been beautiful, with my grandmother's pearl necklace catching the afternoon sunlight as I walked down the aisle. Alden's vows had made me cry happy tears, and when he kissed me at the altar I felt like the luckiest woman alive. The reception started with our first dance to At Last by Etta James, and I remember thinking that nothing could ruin this perfect day. I should have known better. My mother Joanne Hayes had been unusually quiet during the cocktail hour. She wore her signature expression of polite disapproval, the one she'd perfected over years of charity galas and country club events. Her emerald green dress was conservative and expensive, her silver hair styled in the same elegant updo she'd worn to every major event for the past decade. She nursed a single glass of champagne and made small talk with relatives, but I noticed her watching Alden with calculating eyes. Alden came from modest beginnings in Millbrook, a small industrial town about 40 miles from our family's estate in Westfield Heights. His father had worked at the local manufacturing plant for 30 years before retiring, and his mother taught elementary school. They were good, honest people who had raised their son to value hard work and integrity over inherited wealth. When I met Alden at a coffee shop near the university, where I was finishing my business degree, I was immediately drawn to his genuine nature and quick wit. He didn't care that my family had money, and he never tried to impress me with things he didn't have. That authenticity was exactly what my mother despised about him. The trouble started during the toasts. My father had given a lovely speech about gaining a son and wishing us a lifetime of happiness. Alden's best man shared a funny story about how Alden had practiced his proposal speech in the mirror for weeks. My maid of honor talked about how much happier I'd become since meeting Alden. Everything was going perfectly until my mother stood up. She didn't ask for the microphone. She simply walked to the head table where the wedding party was seated, took the microphone from my cousin who had just finished speaking, and tapped it twice to get everyone's attention. The room gradually fell silent as 200 guests turned to look at her. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she began, her voice carrying the authoritative tone she used during board meetings. "As the mother of the bride, I feel it's important to address something that's been weighing on my heart." My stomach dropped. Alden reached for my hand under the table, sensing my sudden tension. "Marriage is about more than love," my mother continued, her gaze sweeping across the room before landing on our table. "It's about partnership, shared values, and building a legacy together. It's about ensuring that the next generation understands the responsibility that comes with the privileges they inherit." I could feel the energy in the room shifting. Guests were exchanging glances, and I saw my aunt whisper something to my uncle. My grandmother, sitting at the family table, looked mortified. "Unfortunately," my mother said, her voice growing stronger, "sometimes our children make choices that force us to make difficult decisions. Sometimes they choose to marry beneath their station, forgetting everything their family has worked to build." The room was now completely silent except for the soft clink of someone setting down a glass. I felt like I was watching a car accident in slow motion, knowing what was coming but powerless to stop it. Mia has chosen to marry a man who will never understand or appreciate the Hayes family legacy. She has chosen love over wisdom, emotion over responsibility. My mother's eyes fixed on Alden, and her voice turned cold. She has chosen to marry beneath us. I heard my grandmother gasp, and someone at a nearby table whispered, "Oh my God." Alden's jaw tightened, but he remained calm, his hand steady in mine. Therefore, my mother announced, raising her champagne glass as if offering a toast. "I want everyone here to know that as of today, Mia Thornton, formerly Mia Hayes, is officially removed from the Hayes family will. She has chosen her path, and we have chosen ours." The silence that followed was deafening. I stared at my mother in complete shock, unable to process what had just happened. She had just publicly disinherited me at my own wedding reception, in front of everyone I cared about. The humiliation was so complete, so unexpected, that I couldn't even form words. Alden stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, his voice remarkably steady. "I think you've said enough." My mother laughed, a sharp sound that cut through the tension. "Oh, I don't think you're in any position to tell me what I can and cannot say, young man. You may have fooled my daughter into thinking you're worthy of her, but you haven't fooled me. I know exactly what you are, a nobody from nowhere who saw an opportunity and took it." That's when something inside me broke. Not from sadness, but from a white-hot anger I'd never felt before. I stood up beside my husband, my legs shaking but my voice clear. "How dare you," I said, loud enough for the entire room to hear. "How dare you turn my wedding day into your personal stage for cruelty?" My mother's smile was cold and satisfied. "I'm sorry you see it that way, dear, but sometimes the truth hurts. You've made your choice, and now you'll live with the consequences." As I looked around the room at the shocked faces of our guests, I noticed something my mother apparently hadn't. Sitting at table 12, having quietly enjoyed dinner and conversation all evening, was a distinguished older gentleman with silver hair and kind eyes. He was dressed in an expensive but understated suit, and he'd been chatting pleasantly with Alden throughout the cocktail hour and dinner service. My mother had been so focused on her dramatic performance that she hadn't bothered to learn who all of our guests were. She had no idea that the unassuming man at table 12 was Nelson Cole, senior partner at Meridian Capital Management, one of the most powerful investment firms on the East Coast. She had no idea that Nelson wasn't just Alden's friend from his morning running group. She had no idea that Nelson Cole was Alden's business partner, and that Meridian Capital Management held the controlling interest in the commercial real estate portfolio that generated 60% of the Hayes family income. But I was about to learn all of this myself, because until that moment, I had no idea either. The humiliation at my wedding wasn't the beginning of my mother's campaign against Alden. It was the culmination of 2 years of increasingly hostile behavior that I had tried desperately to ignore or excuse. When I first brought Alden home to meet my parents 18 months before our wedding, my mother's reaction was immediate and barely concealed. She greeted him with the same polite smile she reserved for service workers and charity cases, the kind that never reached her eyes. During dinner, she asked him pointed questions about his prospects and made subtle comments about how different our backgrounds were. "It must be refreshing," she said over the main course, "to date someone who doesn't have to worry about financial responsibilities. Mia has been so fortunate to grow up without those concerns." Alden handled it with grace, explaining that he'd put himself through college working 2 jobs and was proud of building his consulting business from the ground up. My mother nodded politely, but I could see her mentally filing away everything he said as evidence of his unsuitability. The criticism became more frequent after that first dinner. During family gatherings, my mother would make comments about how Alden seemed overwhelmed by the setting, even though he was perfectly comfortable. She'd introduce him to family friends as Mia's boyfriend from Millbrook, emphasizing his hometown like it was a character flaw. When he offered to help with dishes or cleanup, she'd say things like, "Oh, how thoughtful," in a tone that somehow made kindness sound like proof of lower social status. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The gift giving was perhaps the most cruel aspect of her campaign. For Alden's birthday, she bought him a gift card to a mid-range department store, while she typically gave family friends expensive items from luxury brands. For Christmas, he received a practical sweater from a discount retailer, wrapped in simple paper while everyone else's gifts came in designer boxes with elaborate ribbons. When I confronted her about the disparity, she feigned innocence. "I thought he'd appreciate something practical," she said. I didn't want to make him uncomfortable with anything too extravagant. But the worst part was how she excluded him from family business discussions. The Hayes family fortune came primarily from a real estate portfolio built by my great-grandfather and expanded by each subsequent generation. Family dinners often included conversations about property acquisitions, tenant negotiations, and investment strategies. Whenever Alden was present, my mother would pointedly change the subject or suggest that business talk was boring for guests. "Let's not burden Alden with our tedious family affairs," she'd say with false consideration. "I'm sure he has more interesting things to think about." This exclusion extended to family events and traditions. The annual Hayes Foundation charity auction had been a family affair for decades, with each adult member taking on specific responsibilities. When I suggested that Alden could help with the silent auction logistics, since he had experience with event planning through his consulting work, my mother quickly shot down the idea. "The auction requires someone who understands our donor base," she explained. "It's really quite specialized work. Perhaps Alden could help with setup or cleanup instead." The message was always the same: he could be present, but he would never be family. He could attend events, but he couldn't participate meaningfully. He could sit at our table, but he couldn't contribute to our conversations. My father, typically passive in family dynamics, went along with my mother's behavior. He was polite to Alden but distant, never making an effort to include him or defend him, when my mother's comments became particularly cutting. My younger brother followed my parents' lead, treating Alden like a temporary inconvenience who would eventually disappear. The wedding planning process revealed new depths of my mother's disapproval. She questioned every decision I made that didn't align with Hayes family traditions. When I chose Alden's cousin to officiate our ceremony instead of the family's longtime pastor, she expressed concern about having an unknown quantity performing such an important role. When I included several of Alden's college friends in the wedding party, she worried about how they would fit in with our other guests. Most significantly, she tried to control the guest list. She initially insisted that Alden could invite no more than 50 people, claiming that the venue had limited capacity. When I pointed out that she had invited nearly 100 people from her social circle, many of whom I barely knew, she explained that family obligations and social connections required careful consideration. "These relationships took decades to build," she said. "We can't risk offending important people for the sake of accommodating strangers." I fought back on that issue, insisting that Alden's family and friends deserved equal representation at our wedding. My mother eventually agreed to a more balanced guest list, but not without making it clear that she was making a significant sacrifice. Throughout the engagement, she frequently made comments about how much the wedding was costing, and how she hoped I appreciated the effort she was putting into making the day special. The implication was always that Alden couldn't contribute financially, so I should be grateful for my family's generosity, and not push for accommodations that made my mother uncomfortable. The dress shopping experience was particularly painful. My mother had made appointments at 3 high-end bridal boutiques, each specializing in designer gowns that cost more than many people's cars. When I fell in love with a beautiful but relatively simple dress, my mother pushed me to consider more elaborate options. "You only get one wedding day," she said, holding up a dress covered in crystals and beading. "Don't you want to look like a Hayes bride?" When I stuck with my original choice, she sighed dramatically and said, "I suppose it's appropriate for the kind of wedding you're planning." Even the honeymoon became a source of conflict. Alden and I had planned a modest trip to Ireland, something we could afford together, and had been looking forward to for months. My mother offered to upgrade our trip, suggesting luxury resorts in exotic locations that would be more suitable for a Hayes family wedding. When we politely declined, explaining that we preferred our original plan, she seemed personally offended. "I'm just trying to give you the kind of honeymoon you deserve," she said. "But I suppose if you're determined to do things the hard way, there's nothing I can do to stop you." The pattern was clear: every gesture of independence was treated as a rejection of family values. Every choice that prioritized our preferences over Hayes traditions was seen as evidence of Alden's negative influence on me. My mother had decided that he was beneath us, and she interpreted everything through that lens. What made it worse was how she did it all with a smile, maintaining plausible deniability about her true feelings. She never said anything explicitly hostile that I could confront directly. Instead, she used subtle put-downs, passive-aggressive comments, and strategic exclusions that made her disapproval clear, while allowing her to claim she was being perfectly reasonable. By the time our wedding day arrived, I was emotionally exhausted from 2 years of defending my relationship and trying to bridge the gap between the man I loved and the family I'd grown up wanting to please. I had hoped that seeing Alden and me happy together would finally soften my mother's heart, that she would accept him as part of the family once we were officially married. Instead, she chose our wedding reception as the moment to make her rejection of him, and of me, absolutely and publicly clear. As I stood in that ballroom, reeling from her announcement, I realized that I had been naive to think this was about Alden's worthiness. This was about control, about punishing me for making a choice she couldn't manipulate or approve of. She had spent 2 years trying to break us up through subtle pressure and social humiliation. When that failed, she decided to destroy my relationship with my family instead. What she didn't realize was that her public cruelty was about to backfire in ways she never could have imagined. The moments following my mother's announcement felt like being trapped underwater. Sound became muffled, and everything moved in slow motion as I tried to process what had just happened. 200 guests sat in stunned silence, their expressions ranging from shock to sympathy, to barely concealed fascination at witnessing such a dramatic family implosion. My grandmother, Eleanor Hayes, was the first to break the silence. At 83 years old, she had seen her share of family drama, but nothing had prepared her for watching her daughter publicly destroy her granddaughter's wedding day. She stood up slowly, her hands shaking as she gripped her cane. "Joanne," she said, her voice carrying despite its frailness, "what have you done?" My mother turned to face her own mother with that same cold smile. "I've done what needed to be done, Mother. Someone had to speak the truth." "The truth?" My grandmother's voice grew stronger. "The truth is that you've just humiliated your daughter on what should be the happiest day of her life. The truth is that you've embarrassed this entire family in front of everyone who matters to us." Other family members began to stir. My uncle David, my father's brother, whispered urgently to his wife. My cousin Sarah, who had driven 8 hours to attend the wedding, looked like she wanted to disappear under the table. Even the wedding vendors, the photographer, the DJ, the catering staff, seemed frozen in place, unsure whether to continue working or quietly exit. But it was my father's reaction that cut the deepest. Throughout my entire life, whenever my mother made unreasonable demands or cruel comments, my father had stayed silent. He was a man who avoided conflict at all costs, preferring to let my mother handle difficult situations while he retreated to his study or his golf club. I had always wished he would stand up to her, just once, especially when her behavior affected me. As I looked at him now, hoping desperately that this moment would finally be enough to make him defend his daughter, I saw him staring down at his plate, his face red with embarrassment. Not embarrassment for my mother's behavior, but embarrassment at being part of such a public scene. When he finally looked up, his eyes met mine for just a moment before he looked away. He was going to let this happen, again. "Dad," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Are you going to say anything?" He cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Mia, perhaps we should discuss this privately as a family. This isn't the time or place for personal matters." Even then, even after my mother had just publicly disowned me at my own wedding, he was more concerned about social appearances than defending his daughter. That's when I realized that this wasn't just about my mother's disapproval of Alden. This was about a family dynamic that had been broken for years, maybe decades. My mother ruled through intimidation and emotional manipulation, and my father enabled her by refusing to ever stand up to her. I had been raised in this system, trained to seek their approval and avoid their displeasure, even at the cost of my own happiness. Alden squeezed my hand gently. "We don't have to stay," he said quietly. "We can leave right now." For a moment I considered it. We could walk out of the ballroom together, get in our car, and drive away from all of this. We could start our honeymoon early and deal with the family fallout later. It would be the easy choice, the path of least resistance. But as I looked around the room at our guests, many of whom had traveled long distances and spent considerable money to celebrate with us, I realized that leaving would mean letting my mother win. She wanted me to slink away in shame, to prove her point that I couldn't handle the consequences of my choices. She wanted everyone in that room to remember this night as the time Mia Hayes couldn't measure up to her family's standards. I stood up, my legs steadier than I expected. "No," I said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. This is our wedding reception. These are our guests. We're not going anywhere. My mother raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by my response. I hope you don't expect the family to continue funding this celebration now that you're no longer part of it. It was a calculated blow designed to humiliate me further. The reception was expensive, far beyond what Alden and I could have afforded on our own. My parents had insisted on paying for everything, claiming it was their gift to us. Now my mother was threatening to leave us with a bill that would put us in debt for years. But something had changed in me during those few moments of silence. Maybe it was seeing my father refuse to defend me one more time. Maybe it was realizing that my mother's cruelty had no limits, not even on my wedding day. Or maybe it was looking at Alden and remembering why I had fallen in love with him in the first place. His strength, his integrity, his ability to stay calm under pressure. Actually, I said, surprised by how clear my voice sounded, I think our guests have heard enough from you tonight. This is supposed to be a celebration of love and commitment, not a showcase for your disappointment in your daughter's choices. I turned to address the room, my heart pounding but my voice steady. I apologize to everyone for this disruption. My mother has strong opinions about my marriage, and she's chosen to share them publicly. But Alden and I are happy together. We're committed to building a good life together, and we're grateful to everyone who came here tonight to support us. Scattered applause broke out, starting with Alden's college roommate and spreading to other tables. It wasn't universal. Some of my mother's friends and social circle remained silent, but it was enough to show that not everyone in the room agreed with her assessment of the situation. My mother's face flushed with anger. "Don't you dare try to make me the villain here," she snapped. "I'm trying to protect you from making the biggest mistake of your life. That man will never be able to provide for you the way you deserve. He'll never understand the responsibilities that come with being part of this family." "What responsibilities?" I shot back, years of suppressed frustration finally boiling over. "The responsibility to marry someone you approve of. The responsibility to let you control every aspect of my life. The responsibility to pretend that money and social status are more important than love and respect." "Don't be naive," my mother said. "Love doesn't pay for houses, or educate grandchildren, or maintain the lifestyle you've grown up with. Love doesn't build legacies, or preserve family traditions. You're throwing away everything I've worked to give you for a man who will never be able to replace what you're losing." That's when Alden finally spoke up. Throughout the entire confrontation, he had remained calm and supportive, letting me handle my family drama without trying to take over or escalate the situation. But my mother's continued attacks had finally pushed him past his limit. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, standing up and speaking directly to her, "you're absolutely right about one thing. I can't replace what Mia is losing tonight. I can't replace a mother who would humiliate her own daughter at her wedding. I can't replace a family that values social status over personal happiness. And honestly, I wouldn't want to." The room went completely silent again. Even my mother seemed taken aback by his directness. "But here's what I can offer," Alden continued. "I can offer Mia respect, partnership and unconditional love. I can offer her a relationship based on mutual support, rather than emotional manipulation. I can offer her a future where she's valued for who she is, not judged for who she chooses to marry." He turned to look at me, and his expression softened. "Mia, you're the strongest, smartest, most compassionate person I know. You don't need anyone's approval to validate your worth, especially from people who would treat you this way." Then he turned back to my mother. "As for your concerns about my ability to provide for your daughter, I think you might be surprised by what I'm capable of. But more importantly, Mia is capable of incredible things herself. She doesn't need anyone to take care of her. She needs partners who support her ambitions and celebrate her successes." My mother laughed, but it sounded forced. How noble, how romantic, how completely unrealistic. "Do you have any idea what it costs to maintain the kind of life Mia is accustomed to? Do you understand the financial responsibilities she'll face as she gets older?" "Actually," said a voice from across the room, "I think you might be surprised by Alden's understanding of financial responsibilities." Everyone turned to see who had spoken. It was the distinguished gentleman from Table 12, Nelson Cole, who had been quietly observing the entire drama. He stood up with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to commanding attention in boardrooms and at high-stakes negotiations. My mother looked confused. She had no idea who this man was, or why he was inserting himself into our family conflict. "I'm sorry," she said, with icy politeness, "but I don't believe we've been introduced. This is a private family matter." Nelson smiled, and there was something in his expression that made me pay closer attention. You're absolutely right that we haven't been introduced. I'm Nelson Cole from Meridian Capital Management, and while this may be a private family matter, I think there are some business realities you might want to consider before you continue this conversation. I saw my mother's expression change slightly. Even she had heard of Meridian Capital Management, one of the most powerful investment firms on the East Coast. But she still didn't understand why this man was involving himself in our drama. I appreciate your concern, she said carefully, but I fail to see how our family decisions are relevant to your business interests. Nelson's smile widened. Well, that's where things get interesting. You see, Alden here isn't just my friend from our morning running group. He's also my business partner, and Meridian Capital Management happens to hold some very significant investments that I think might surprise you. The room was completely silent now, everyone hanging on every word. I felt Alden's hand tighten around mine, and I realized that there was something important happening here that I didn't fully understand yet. My mother's face had gone pale. Business partner, she repeated. That's right, Nelson said. And speaking of business, I believe Meridian currently manages the investment portfolio for several of your family's commercial real estate holdings. Quite substantial holdings, if I remember correctly. I watched my mother's face as the implications of what Nelson was saying began to sink in. The Hayes family fortune was largely built on commercial real estate, properties that required ongoing management and investment to maintain their value. If Meridian Capital managed those investments, then Nelson Cole had significant influence over my family's financial future, and he had just witnessed my mother publicly humiliate his business partner's wife at her own wedding. The silence in the ballroom stretched for what felt like an eternity, as the weight of Nelson Cole's words settled over the room. I could see my mother's mind racing, trying to process the implications of what she had just heard. Her face had gone from flushed with anger to pale with something that looked suspiciously like fear. I'm not sure I understand, she said carefully, her voice losing some of its earlier confidence. Are you saying that you manage our family's investment portfolio? Nelson stepped away from his table and walked closer to where we were standing. As he moved, I noticed that several other guests were paying careful attention to the conversation, and I realized that some of them might be business associates who understood the significance of what was happening. Not just manage, Nelson said with quiet authority. Meridian Capital Management holds controlling interests in the investment vehicles that fund approximately 60% of the Hayes family's commercial real estate portfolio. We've been your family's primary investment partner for the past 8 years. I saw my father sit up straighter in his chair, his face suddenly very serious. Unlike my mother, who handled the social aspects of family business, my father was more involved in the financial details. He would understand exactly what Nelson was telling us. The Westfield Commons project, my father said slowly, naming one of our family's largest commercial developments. The Harbor District renovation, the downtown office complex acquisition, Nelson nodded. All funded through Meridian partnerships, with our firm holding majority positions in the investment structures. Your family has been an excellent client, and we've been very pleased with the returns on those projects. My mother looked confused, still not grasping the full implications. Well, yes, we've had a very good relationship with Meridian. I'm sure that will continue. Actually, Nelson said, that's exactly what I wanted to discuss. You see, all of our investment partnerships include standard morality and character clauses. Our firm has a reputation to maintain, and we're very careful about the partners we choose to work with. I felt a chill run down my spine as I began to understand where this was going. Alden squeezed my hand, and I could see that he was watching Nelson with a mixture of surprise and growing awareness. What exactly are you saying? My father asked, his voice tight. Nelson's expression remained pleasant but professional. I'm saying that what I witnessed here tonight, a family publicly humiliating one of their own at her wedding, demonstrates a level of cruelty and poor judgment that raises serious questions about character. The kind of questions that might make my partners uncomfortable about continuing our business relationship. My mother's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. You can't be serious. This is a private family matter that has nothing to do with business. On the contrary, Nelson replied, character absolutely has everything to do with business. How a person treats their family members, especially in moments of stress or disagreement, tells us a great deal about how they'll treat their business partners when things get difficult. He gestured toward Alden. I've known Alden for 3 years now. We met when he approached Meridian with a proposal for optimizing commercial real estate investments through advanced data analysis. His insights were so valuable that we hired him as a consultant and eventually offered him a partnership position. I stared at my husband in amazement. In all our conversations about his work, he had never mentioned being a partner at Meridian Capital Management. I knew he did consulting work for various firms, but I had assumed they were smaller, local businesses. Alden has been instrumental in identifying the investment opportunities that have generated millions in returns for Meridian and our clients. Nelson continued, including the investments in your family's properties. In fact, the success of the Westfield Commons project was largely due to Alden's analysis of market trends and consumer behavior patterns. My mother looked like she was going to be sick. That's impossible. He's just a consultant from some small town. He's a consultant who graduated summa cum laude from Wharton Business School and spent 2 years working for Goldman Sachs before deciding he preferred the flexibility of independent consulting. Nelson said, he's also one of the most brilliant financial analysts I've ever worked with. I turned to look at Alden, who had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. You never told me you went to Wharton, I said softly. You never asked about my educational background, he said with a small smile. You were more interested in who I was as a person than what credentials I had. It was one of the things I loved about you from the beginning. Nelson chuckled. Alden is rather modest about his accomplishments, but his work speaks for itself. The portfolio optimization strategies he developed have been adopted by firms across the industry. He's been invited to speak at 3 major conferences this year alone. My father was now completely focused on the conversation. Are you telling me that this young man has been involved in our family's investment decisions? More than involved, Nelson said. He's been the primary architect of your investment strategy for the past 2 years. The returns you've seen, the growth in your portfolio value, the successful acquisitions, that's all been guided by Alden's analysis and recommendations. I felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. Everything I thought I knew about our situation was being rewritten in real time. My husband wasn't just the nobody from nowhere that my mother had described. He was a successful businessman who had been quietly building wealth and success while staying humble about his achievements. But more than that, he had been directly responsible for the financial success that allowed my family to maintain their lifestyle and social stability. The same lifestyle and status that my mother had used as weapons against him. This is all very interesting, my mother said, clearly struggling to regain control of the situation, but it doesn't change the fundamental issues. Mia has made a choice that goes against family traditions and values. Nelson's expression hardened slightly. What I saw here tonight wasn't about tradition or values. I saw a mother deliberately humiliate her daughter on one of the most important days of her life. I saw someone use financial intimidation to try to control another person's personal choices. And I saw a family that doesn't deserve the loyalty of someone as decent as Alden. He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. Meridian Capital Management builds partnerships based on mutual respect and shared values. We work with people who understand that success isn't just about financial returns, it's about maintaining integrity and treating others with dignity. My father stood up, his face pale. Mr. Cole, surely we can discuss this reasonably. There's no need for business and personal matters to intersect like this. Actually, there's every need, Nelson said firmly. Character matters in business, Mr. Hayes. How you treat your family tells me how you'll treat your business partners when the stakes are high or when things don't go according to plan. He looked directly at my mother. Mrs. Hayes, you've just demonstrated that you're willing to destroy your own daughter's happiness to maintain control. You've shown that you value appearances and social status over love and loyalty. Those aren't the qualities Meridian looks for in long-term partners. The implications were becoming clear to everyone in the room. My mother's dramatic gesture hadn't just cost her relationship with me, it had potentially jeopardized the family's primary source of income. The commercial real estate investments that funded their lifestyle, their social status, their ability to maintain the Hayes family legacy, all of it depended on their partnership with Meridian Capital Management. And she had just insulted and humiliated Meridian's newest partner in front of 200 witnesses. What exactly are you proposing? My father asked quietly. Nelson smiled, but it wasn't a warm expression. I'm not proposing anything tonight. This is your daughter's wedding reception, and despite everything that's happened, I think we should try to salvage what's left of the celebration. He looked around the room at our guests, many of whom were watching the drama with fascination, but I will say this. Meridian will be conducting a comprehensive review of all our partnership agreements over the next few weeks. We'll be evaluating whether our current relationships align with our company values and long-term strategic goals. The threat was clear, even though it was delivered with professional politeness. My family's financial future was now in jeopardy because of my mother's cruel behavior. I looked at Alden, still trying to process everything I had learned about him in the past few minutes. Why didn't you tell me about any of this? Because it wasn't about impressing you or your family. He said simply, I wanted you to love me for who I am, not for what I do or how much money I make. I've seen too many relationships where people fall in love with resumes instead of people. I realized that while my mother had been judging Alden based on superficial assumptions about his background and potential, she had completely missed the reality of who he actually was. She had been so focused on his modest origins that she had never bothered to learn about his achievements or capabilities. Nelson looked at me with genuine warmth. Mia, I want you to know that Alden talks about you constantly. He's incredibly proud of your intelligence and your independence. He's also mentioned how difficult your family's situation has been, though he's been much more diplomatic about it than I would have been. That's when the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. Not only was my husband a successful business partner at one of the region's most powerful investment firms, but he had been protecting me from knowing about my family's financial dependence on his work. He could have used that information at any point during the past 2 years to shut down my mother's criticism or defend himself against her attacks. Instead, he had endured her insults and exclusions in silence, preferring to let her judge him based on false assumptions rather than leverage his professional relationship with her family's business interests. The man my mother had just publicly declared unworthy was literally the person responsible for funding her lifestyle. The rest of the wedding reception passed in a surreal blur. After Nelson's revelation, the energy in the room completely shifted. My mother, clearly shaken by the implications of what had just transpired, retreated to her table and sat in stunned silence. My father spent the remainder of the evening making awkward small talk with business associates, obviously trying to gauge how much damage had been done to the family's reputation. Meanwhile, our guests seemed unsure how to react. Some approached Alden and me to offer congratulations and support, while others maintained a polite distance, perhaps unsure which side of the family drama they should align themselves with. The dancing resumed eventually, and the band continued playing, but the celebratory atmosphere had been permanently altered by my mother's outburst and its unexpected consequences. Alden handled everything with remarkable grace. He danced with me during our planned special dances, chatted warmly with our friends, and even made polite conversation with family members who had witnessed his public humiliation just hours earlier. If he was angry or hurt by what had happened, he didn't show it. Instead, he focused on making sure I felt supported and loved, despite my family's behavior. But I could see something calculating in his eyes, a quiet intensity that I had never noticed before. Throughout our relationship, Alden had always been thoughtful and strategic in his approach to problems, but I was beginning to understand that there were depths to his planning capabilities that I had never fully appreciated. As we said goodbye to our guests at the end of the evening, Nelson Cole approached us one final time. Alden, Mia, congratulations on a beautiful wedding despite the unexpected drama. I hope you have a wonderful honeymoon in Ireland. He shook hands with both of us, but when he reached Alden, he said quietly, we should schedule a meeting when you get back. There are some strategic opportunities we need to discuss. Alden nodded. I'll call your office next week to set something up. After Nelson left, I turned to my husband with questions I had been holding back all evening. Alden, what just happened here? How long have you been partners with Meridian? Why didn't you ever tell me about your involvement with my family's business? He looked around the now nearly empty ballroom, then took my hand. Let's go back to the hotel. We have a lot to talk about, and I'd rather do it privately. During the short drive to our hotel, I tried to process everything I had learned. My husband was not only successful in his own right, but he was directly involved in managing the investments that sustained my family's wealth. He had known for years about the Hayes family's financial dependence on Meridian Capital Management, yet he had never used that information to defend himself against my mother's attacks, or to gain leverage in family situations. In our hotel suite, still wearing our wedding attire, Alden and I sat down for the most important conversation of our relationship. He poured 2 glasses of champagne from the bottle the hotel had provided, and we toasted quietly to our marriage before addressing the elephant in the room. I need you to understand something, Alden began. Everything Nelson said tonight was true. I am a partner at Meridian. I have been involved in your family's investment strategy, and yes, I went to Wharton and worked on Wall Street before starting my consulting practice. I nodded, still trying to reconcile this information with the modest, unassuming man I had fallen in love with. But why keep it secret? Why let my mother treat you like you were beneath our family when you knew you had this kind of professional credibility? Alden sighed and loosened his tie. Because I wanted you to love me for who I am, not for what I could do for your family, or how I might fit into their social expectations. I've seen too many relationships destroyed by financial manipulation and status games. I wanted ours to be different. He stood up and walked to the window overlooking the city, but there's more to it than that. When I first started working with Meridian, and learned about their relationship with your family's investments, I made a deliberate choice to keep those worlds separate. I never wanted there to be any question about my motives for being with you. What do you mean? I asked, though I was beginning to understand. I mean that if your family had known about my professional relationship with their business interests from the beginning, they might have accepted me for the wrong reasons. They might have welcomed me, because I was useful to them, not because I made you happy. And you might have wondered if I was interested in you because of your family's wealth or business connections. I realized he was right. If my mother had known from our first meeting that Alden was a successful businessman with direct influence over their family's financial future, her behavior toward him would have been completely different. She would have been charming and accommodating, trying to strengthen their business relationship rather than pushing him away. So you chose to let them judge you based on false assumptions rather than risk having them accept you for the wrong reasons, I said. Exactly, and honestly their behavior told me everything I needed to know about their character. The way they treated someone they thought was beneath them revealed who they really were. If they had been kind and welcoming to someone they believed had nothing to offer them, that would have been different. Alden returned to sit beside me on the couch, but tonight, when your mother decided to publicly humiliate you at our wedding, that crossed a line I wasn't willing to tolerate. I don't care how she treats me, but I won't stand by and watch her destroy your happiness for the sake of her social prejudices. I thought about everything that had transpired during the reception. My mother's cruel announcement, the shocked reaction of our guests, Nelson's intervention, and the gradual realization that my family's financial security depended on their relationship with the man they had just insulted and rejected. What happens now? I asked. Nelson mentioned conducting a review of partnership agreements. Is that a real threat, or was he just trying to make a point? Alden was quiet for a long moment. Nelson is a businessman first and foremost. He doesn't make idle threats, and he doesn't let personal relationships interfere with professional decisions. But he also values integrity and character in his business partners. He looked at me seriously. What your mother did tonight wasn't just cruel to us personally. It demonstrated a fundamental lack of judgment and decency that raises legitimate questions about whether Meridian wants to continue doing business with your family. I felt a chill as the implications sank in. Are you saying that my mother's behavior could actually cost my family their primary source of income? I'm saying that actions have consequences, Alden replied carefully. Your mother made a choice to prioritize her social prejudices over family loyalty and basic human decency. She did it publicly, in front of business associates and community members who will remember what they witnessed. He stood up and began pacing the room, and I could see his mind working through the strategic implications of what had happened. Meridian's reputation is built on working with clients who share their values: integrity, respect, long-term thinking, partnership rather than exploitation. What happened tonight calls into question whether your family embodies those values. I realized that my husband had been thinking about this situation far more strategically than I had initially understood. While I had been focused on the personal hurt and family drama, he had been evaluating the business and financial implications of my mother's behavior. Have you been planning for something like this to happen? I asked. Alden shook his head. Not planning, exactly, but I've been documenting things. The way your mother excluded me from family business discussions, the comments she made about my background and prospects, the way she tried to control our wedding planning and guest list. He pulled out his phone and showed me a folder labeled Hayes Family Interactions. I keep detailed notes of our conversations, especially when they involve business or financial topics. It's a habit from my consulting work, but it's also been useful for understanding the family dynamics. I scrolled through some of the notes, seeing our family interactions through Alden's analytical perspective. He had documented patterns of behavior, recorded specific comments, and tracked the escalation of my mother's hostility over time. This looks like you're building a case, I said. I'm protecting us, he replied. Your mother has made it clear that she's willing to use financial leverage to control your behavior. The disinheritance threat wasn't just dramatic theater, it was a warning about what she'll do if you don't comply with her wishes. Alden sat back down beside me and took my hands. Mia, I need you to understand something. I love you, and I want to protect our marriage and our future together, but I also have professional responsibilities to Meridian and to our other clients. If continuing to work with your family creates conflicts of interest or ethical concerns, I may have to make some difficult decisions. I realized that we were at a crossroads. My mother's behavior had forced a situation where personal and professional relationships were colliding in ways that could have serious consequences for everyone involved. What are you thinking? I asked. Alden was quiet for several minutes, his expression thoughtful. Finally he said, I think it's time for some strategic transparency. Your family has been making decisions based on incomplete information about who I am and what I'm capable of. Maybe it's time for them to understand the full scope of their situation. He explained that while Meridian did hold controlling interests in many of the Hayes family investments, the specific terms of those partnerships included performance clauses and character assessments that could trigger renegotiation or termination under certain circumstances. The behavior Nelson witnessed tonight could legitimately be considered a material change in the character and judgment of our business partners, Alden said. That gives Meridian legal grounds to request renegotiation of terms, or in extreme cases to terminate the partnerships entirely. I felt a mix of excitement and apprehension as I began to understand what he was suggesting. My mother had used the threat of financial consequences to try to control my behavior. Now she was facing the possibility of real financial consequences for her own actions. Are you saying we could turn the tables on them? I asked. I'm saying that we have options they don't know about, Alden replied. Your mother assumes that cutting you off from the family money gives her all the power in this situation. She doesn't realize that her access to that money depends on maintaining a business relationship with people who now have serious concerns about her character and judgment. As we talked through the possibilities, I realized that my husband had been thinking several steps ahead throughout our entire relationship. He had positioned himself to protect us financially, while maintaining his integrity and professional reputation. He had documented everything needed to demonstrate a pattern of unreasonable behavior from my family. And he had built relationships with key decision-makers who could influence my family's financial future. Most importantly, he had done all of this without compromising his principles or stooping to the same level of manipulation and control that my mother had used against us. What's our next step? I asked. Alden smiled, and for the first time that evening it reached his eyes. We go on our honeymoon. We enjoy Ireland, we celebrate our marriage, and we let your family think about the conversation they witnessed tonight. He stood up and began unbuttoning his dress shirt. While we're gone, Nelson will be conducting his review of partnership agreements. He'll be having conversations with other Meridian partners about the character and judgment demonstrated by potential business associates. And your family will be realizing that their financial future depends on the goodwill of the man they just publicly insulted and rejected. As I watched my husband prepare for bed, I realized that I had married someone far more formidable than I had ever imagined. Not because he was ruthless or manipulative, but because he was strategic, principled, and absolutely committed to protecting the people he loved. My mother had spent 2 years trying to convince me that I was settling for less by marrying Alden. Tonight I had learned that I had actually married someone who could match her strategic thinking while maintaining his moral integrity. The game had changed, and my mother didn't even realize it yet. Our honeymoon in Ireland was supposed to be a romantic escape from the drama that had unfolded at our wedding reception. We had planned to spend 2 weeks exploring the countryside, visiting ancient castles, and enjoying the peaceful solitude of rural bed and breakfasts. Instead, it became a strategic planning session that would change the trajectory of both our lives and my family's future. On our second day in Dublin, while sitting in a cozy pub overlooking the River Liffey, Alden received a call from Nelson Cole. I watched my husband's expression grow increasingly serious as he listened to whatever Nelson was telling him. When he hung up, he was quiet for several minutes, staring out at the water. What did Nelson say? I asked, though I could tell from Alden's demeanor that it wasn't good news for my family. He's been having conversations with the other Meridian partners about what happened at our wedding, Alden said carefully. The consensus is that your mother's behavior demonstrates a fundamental character flaw that raises serious questions about continuing the business relationship. I felt my stomach drop. Despite everything that had happened, despite my anger at my mother's cruelty, the thought of my family losing their primary source of income was overwhelming. What kind of questions? Alden pulled out his notebook, the same one where he had been documenting my family's behavior for the past 2 years. Nelson asked me to provide a comprehensive report about my interactions with your family. He wants documentation of any incidents that might indicate a pattern of poor judgment, ethical concerns, or character issues. As he flipped through the pages, I saw months of detailed notes about family dinners, business conversations, and social interactions. Every slight, every exclusion, every cruel comment had been recorded with the precision of a business analyst building a case study. Alden, this is incredibly thorough, I said, reading over his shoulder. You've been documenting everything. It's what I do professionally, he replied. When I'm evaluating potential business partners or investment opportunities, I document behavioral patterns, decision-making processes, and character indicators. It helps me understand who I'm really dealing with beneath the surface presentations. He showed me entries from our first family dinner 18 months earlier, where my mother had made subtle but cutting comments about his background. There were notes from charity events where she had excluded him from business conversations, detailed records of her attempts to control our wedding planning, and careful documentation of her escalating hostility toward our relationship. But here's the thing, Alden continued, this documentation isn't just about building a case against your family, it's also about protecting Meridian's other clients and investments. When we make partnership decisions, we're responsible for ensuring that our associates meet certain standards of integrity and judgment. I realized that what had seemed like a personal family conflict was actually much bigger than I had understood. My mother's behavior wasn't just affecting our relationship, it was calling into question her fitness as a business partner for one of the region's most respected investment firms. What happens next? I asked. Alden was quiet for a moment, clearly weighing his words carefully. Nelson is recommending that Meridian conduct a formal review of all Hayes family investment partnerships. That review will include interviews with family members, evaluation of past business decisions, and assessment of character and judgment indicators. The implications were staggering. A formal review by Meridian Capital Management would essentially put my family's business practices under a microscope. Every decision, every transaction, every interaction would be scrutinized by professionals whose job was to identify risks and character flaws. How long does something like that take? I asked. Typically 6 to 8 weeks for a comprehensive assessment, Alden replied. But given the complexity of your family's investment portfolio, and the seriousness of the concerns raised, it could take longer. I thought about my parents back home, probably assuming that their dramatic gesture at our wedding had successfully intimidated us into compliance. They had no idea that their actions had triggered a process that could fundamentally alter their financial future. There's something else, Alden said, his expression growing more serious. Nelson mentioned that word of what happened at our wedding is already spreading through the business community. Several people who were there that night have connections to other investment firms, charitable organizations, and social groups that your family is involved with. I felt a chill as I realized what he was saying. My mother's public outburst hadn't just damaged her relationship with Meridian Capital Management. It had been witnessed by dozens of people who would talk about what they had seen, potentially affecting my family's reputation across multiple social and business networks. Who was there that night who might matter? I asked, trying to remember the guest list. Alden pulled out his phone and showed me a list he had compiled. 3 board members from different charitable foundations your family supports, 2 executives from the country club where your parents are members, a real estate attorney who handles transactions for several wealthy families in the area, the mayor's wife, who chairs the committee that awards city development contracts. As he continued reading names, I realized that my mother had chosen to have her dramatic meltdown in front of exactly the wrong audience. These weren't just wedding guests who would gossip about family drama. These were people whose professional opinions could affect my family's business relationships, social standing, and community influence. It gets worse, Alden continued. Apparently someone recorded at least part of your mother's speech on their phone. Nelson heard about it from a colleague whose wife was at the wedding. The video is being shared privately among certain social circles. I felt sick. The thought of my mother's cruel words being replayed and shared among the business and social elite of our community was mortifying, not just for her but for our entire family. What exactly is in the recording? I asked. From what Nelson heard, it captures your mother announcing your disinheritance and calling me a nobody from nowhere who tricked you into settling for less. It also includes her comments about me never being worthy of the Hayes bloodline and never understanding family responsibilities. Alden put his phone away and looked at me seriously. Mia, Your mother didn't just insult me personally. She demonstrated in front of influential community members that she's willing to publicly humiliate her own daughter to maintain control. That kind of behavior raises questions about her judgment in all areas of her life, including business decisions. Over the following days, as we continued our honeymoon travels through the Irish countryside, Alden received regular updates from Nelson about the developing situation back home. Each call brought news of new complications for my family. The first major blow came when the Westfield Historical Society, a prestigious organization where my mother served on the board of directors, requested her resignation. Apparently, several board members had been at our wedding and were uncomfortable with her behavior. The society's bylaws included provisions about board members conducting themselves in a manner consistent with the organization's values of community service and family commitment. They can't force her to resign, Alden explained after relaying Nelson's update, but they can make it clear that her continued presence is unwelcome. For someone like your mother who values social status and community recognition, that kind of pressure is incredibly effective. The second blow was more directly financial. The Harrison Development Group, a major commercial real estate company that had partnered with my family on several projects, requested a meeting to reassess their strategic partnerships. The Harrison family had been at our wedding, and they were apparently concerned about being associated with the kind of family drama they had witnessed. It's not just about the money, Alden noted, it's about reputation. In the commercial real estate world, perception is reality. If other developers and investors start viewing your family as unstable or difficult to work with, it becomes much harder to put together the complex partnerships that drive major projects. But the most devastating news came during our final week in Ireland. Nelson called to inform us that the video of my mother's speech had reached someone at the State Ethics Commission. Apparently, one of the wedding guests had connections to state government, and they had raised questions about whether my mother's behavior violated the ethical standards required for the various state boards and commissions she served on. What kind of boards is she involved with? Alden asked me as we sat in our hotel room in Galway, trying to process this latest development. I tried to remember all of my mother's various appointments and positions. She's on the State Tourism Development Board, the Historical Preservation Commission, and the Educational Excellence Advisory Panel. She's also involved with the State Arts Council and something called the Economic Development Strategy Committee. Alden made notes as I spoke. Those are all prestigious appointments that come with real influence and financial oversight responsibilities. If the Ethics Commission decides to investigate her conduct, it could result in removal from those positions. The implications were staggering. My mother's social identity was built around her various leadership roles and community positions. Losing those appointments would be more than just a financial blow, it would be a complete destruction of her public persona and social standing. How did this escalate so quickly? I asked, feeling overwhelmed by the rapid succession of consequences. Because your mother made a strategic error, Alden replied. She chose to have her dramatic moment in front of people whose opinions matter in the business and social communities she's part of. She thought she was demonstrating strength and family values, but instead she demonstrated cruelty and poor judgment. He pulled out his laptop and showed me a spreadsheet he had been working on. I've been tracking the connections between our wedding guests and various organizations, businesses, and social groups. The overlap is extensive. Your mother essentially gave a character demonstration to a room full of people who have influence over different aspects of her life. As I looked at the spreadsheet, I realized that my husband had been thinking about this situation with the same analytical precision he brought to his investment work. He had identified the key stakeholders, mapped their relationships and influences, and predicted how information would flow through various networks. "You've been planning for this," I said, not accusingly but with growing admiration for his strategic thinking. "I've been preparing for various scenarios," he clarified. "Your mother's behavior has been escalating for 2 years. I knew that eventually she would do something that crossed a line, and I wanted to be ready to protect us when that happened." Alden showed me another document, this one outlining different response strategies depending on how my family chose to handle the situation. If they had apologized sincerely and tried to make amends, I had plans for rebuilding the relationship gradually. If they had quietly backed down from their threats, I was prepared to maintain the status quo while keeping appropriate boundaries. He scrolled to a section labeled Escalation Response. But if they chose to double down on their behavior or attempt to follow through on their threats against us, I was prepared to use every legitimate tool available to protect our interests and hold them accountable for their actions. I realized that my mother had unknowingly triggered the most severe response option by making her threats so public and so cruel. If she had simply cut me off privately, or if she had limited her criticism to private family conversations, the consequences would have been much less severe. But she chose to humiliate you publicly. Alden continued, and she did it in front of people who have the power to affect her business relationships, social standing, and community influence. That forced me to respond proportionally. The final call of our honeymoon came as we were packing to return home. Nelson's voice was serious as he delivered the news that would fundamentally change my family's situation. The Meridian partners have completed their preliminary review, Nelson told Alden over speakerphone. We've voted unanimously to terminate our investment partnerships with the Hayes family, effective in 60 days. We'll be offering to buy out their remaining equity positions at fair market value, but we will not be renewing any of the partnership agreements. I felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. Despite everything that had happened, despite my anger at my mother's behavior, I hadn't fully believed that it would come to this. What does that mean practically? Alden asked, though I could tell he already knew the answer. It means the Hayes family will lose approximately 60% of their investment income. Nelson replied, they'll need to find new funding sources for their commercial real estate projects, new management for their existing properties, and new partnerships for future developments. Nelson's voice softened slightly. I want you both to know that this decision wasn't made lightly. We've worked with the Hayes family for 8 years, and until recently, it's been a profitable relationship for everyone involved. But what we witnessed at your wedding, combined with the pattern of behavior Alden documented, convinced us that this partnership is no longer sustainable. After Nelson hung up, Alden and I sat in silence for several minutes. The magnitude of what had just happened was overwhelming. My mother's moment of cruel theater had cost my family their primary source of income and financial security. How will they survive this? I asked quietly. They'll have to make significant lifestyle changes. Alden replied honestly. They'll need to sell some properties, reduce their expenses, and probably liquidate some investments to maintain cash flow. It won't be easy, but they won't be destitute. He looked at me with concern. How do you feel about all of this? I thought about that question for a long time. Part of me felt guilty for the role I had played in triggering these consequences. But a larger part of me felt a sense of justice finally being served. My mother had used financial threats and emotional manipulation to try to control my life. Now she was facing the real financial consequences of her own choices and behavior. I feel like she finally learned that actions have consequences. I said eventually. She spent 2 years treating you terribly and threatening to punish me financially for my choices. Now she's discovering what real financial consequences look like. As we boarded our flight back to the United States, I realized that we were returning to a completely different situation than the one we had left. My family's financial empire was crumbling, their social standing was damaged, and their future was uncertain. But Alden and I were stronger than ever, our relationship tested and proven resilient. We had faced the worst my family could throw at us, and we had emerged not just intact, but victorious. The game my mother had started with her wedding speech was finally over, and she had lost more completely than she could have ever imagined. The drive from the airport back to our apartment felt like entering a different world. While we had been in Ireland watching my family's empire crumble from afar, life in our small college town had continued unchanged. The same coffee shops were bustling with students, the same tree-lined streets looked peaceful in the late afternoon sun, and our modest apartment building stood exactly as we had left it 2 weeks earlier. But everything was different now. We were no longer the struggling newlyweds trying to build a life together despite family disapproval. We were partners who had successfully defended ourselves against a coordinated attack on our relationship and emerged victorious. More importantly, we had learned that we could trust each other completely, even when facing the worst kind of family crisis. Our first indication of how dramatically things had changed came when we checked our voicemail. 17 messages from my mother, each one more desperate than the last. The early messages were angry, demanding that I call her immediately to discuss this ridiculous situation with Meridian Capital. The later messages were pleading, asking me to help fix what she called a terrible misunderstanding that was threatening the family's financial security. The final message, left just the day before our return, was barely above a whisper. Mia, please call me. I think I may have made a terrible mistake. We need to talk. I looked at Alden as the voicemail ended. Should I call her back? He considered the question carefully. That's entirely up to you. But whatever you decide, we should approach it strategically. Your mother has spent 2 years trying to manipulate and control you. If you're going to engage with her now, it should be on your terms, not hers." I realized he was right. For too long I had responded to my mother's demands immediately, rushing to smooth over conflicts and restore family harmony even when she was clearly in the wrong. This time I could choose when and how to engage, if at all. We decided to settle back into our routine first. Alden returned to work the following Monday, and I could see that his colleagues at the local consulting firm, where he maintained an office, treated him with a new level of respect. Word had apparently spread about his partnership with Meridian Capital Management, and several people made comments about being impressed by his professional accomplishments. "It's funny," he said over dinner that first week back. "I've been working with some of these people for 3 years, and they're treating me like I'm a different person now that they know about the Meridian partnership." I understood what he meant. People's perceptions had been shaped by assumptions about his background and status, just like my family's had been. The revelation of his true professional position forced them to recalibrate their understanding of who he really was. Meanwhile, the consequences for my family continued to unfold with devastating precision. My father called me directly for the first time in months, his voice strained as he explained the full scope of their financial crisis. "Mia, I need you to understand how serious this situation has become," he said during our awkward phone conversation. The Meridian partnership wasn't just one investment among many, it was the foundation of our entire business model. He explained that without Meridian's backing, they would be forced to sell several major properties just to maintain cash flow. The commercial developments that had been generating steady rental income for years would need to be liquidated because they couldn't afford the ongoing management and maintenance costs without Meridian's support. "We're looking at losing about 70% of our monthly income," my father continued. "Your mother is trying to find alternative investment partners, but everyone she's approached has heard about what happened at your wedding. They're concerned about entering into business relationships with our family, given the questions about judgment and character." I felt a complex mix of emotions as I listened to him describe their situation. Part of me was satisfied that my mother was finally facing real consequences for her behavior. But another part of me felt sad about the destruction of the family legacy that had taken generations to build. "What do you want from me, Dad?" I asked directly. There was a long pause. "I want you to talk to your husband. Maybe he could speak with his partners at Meridian, explain that your mother was just emotional about the wedding, help them understand that this isn't really about business character." I almost laughed at the absurdity of his request. "Dad, do you understand what actually happened that night? Mom didn't just get emotional, she publicly humiliated me and Alden in front of 200 people. She announced that she was cutting me out of the family because I married beneath our social status. She called my husband a nobody who would never be worthy of our bloodline." "I know it looked bad," my father said weakly. "But she didn't mean it the way it sounded. She was just trying to make a point about family traditions and expectations." That's when I realized that my father still didn't grasp the magnitude of what my mother had done. He was treating it like a social embarrassment rather than a fundamental character revelation that had destroyed their business relationships. "Dad, let me explain something to you," I said, feeling a clarity I had never experienced in conversations with my family before. "Alden is a partner at Meridian Capital Management. He's not just some consultant they work with occasionally. He's an owner of the firm that has been managing your investments for 8 years. I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end of the line. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that when Mom called him a nobody from nowhere who tricked me into settling for less, she was insulting a man who had been directly responsible for the financial success that allowed her to maintain her lifestyle and social status. The investment returns that funded your country club memberships, your charity work, your expensive cars and vacations. All of that came from strategies that Alden developed." The silence stretched for nearly a full minute. Finally, my father said quietly, "We didn't know." "You didn't know because you never bothered to learn," I replied. "You both made assumptions about Alden based on his modest background and never took the time to understand who he really was or what he was capable of. You judged him based on social status rather than character or accomplishments." The conversation ended with my father asking if there was any way to repair the relationship with Meridian. I told him honestly that I didn't know, but that any hope of reconciliation would require genuine acknowledgement of wrongdoing and sincere apologies, not just financial desperation. A few days later, I received an unexpected visitor. My grandmother, Eleanor Hayes, appeared at our apartment door looking frail but determined. At 83 she rarely drove anymore, but she had made the hour-long trip from Westfield Heights to speak with me personally. "Grandmother, what are you doing here?" I asked, inviting her in and helping her to our most comfortable chair. "I came to apologize," she said simply, "and to tell you how ashamed I am of my daughter's behavior at your wedding." Over tea in our small living room, my grandmother told me about the family upheaval that had followed our return from Ireland. My mother had been forced to resign from 3 different boards and commissions, ostensibly for personal reasons, but actually because her continued presence had become an embarrassment to the organizations. She's been making phone calls for weeks, trying to rebuild relationships and repair her reputation, my grandmother explained. "But people remember what they saw that night. They remember how she treated you and your husband, and they're questioning whether they want to be associated with someone capable of such cruelty." My grandmother looked tired as she continued. "I've been part of this family for over 50 years, Mia. I've seen us make mistakes before, but nothing like this. Your mother let her pride and social prejudices destroy not just your relationship with the family, but the family's standing in the community." She reached for my hand. "I want you to know that not everyone in the family supported what happened that night. Your Uncle David has been furious about it. Your cousin Sarah called me in tears the next day. Even your father, despite his refusal to stand up to your mother, knows that she went too far." "Then why didn't anyone say anything at the time?" I asked. "Because we've all been enablers," my grandmother said with painful honesty. "We've been letting Joanne control family decisions through intimidation and emotional manipulation for so long that we forgot how to stand up to her. We were all so focused on avoiding conflict that we allowed her to create a much bigger conflict." When Alden arrived home from work that evening, my grandmother was still there. I watched nervously as they met for the first time since the wedding, unsure how he would respond to another member of my family. But my grandmother surprised both of us. She stood up as soon as Alden entered the room and walked directly to him. "Mr. Finch," she said formally, "I owe you an apology. I should have defended you that night, and I should have stopped my daughter from saying those terrible things. I failed in my responsibility as a family elder, and I'm deeply sorry." Alden was clearly moved by her directness. "Mrs. Hayes, I appreciate that more than you know. But you're not responsible for other people's choices." "I'm responsible for my own choices," she replied firmly. "And I chose to stay silent when I should have spoken up. That makes me complicit in what happened to you and Mia." My grandmother spent another hour with us, sharing stories about my grandfather and the values he had tried to instill in the family. She talked about how disappointed he would have been in my mother's behavior, and how proud he would have been of the way Alden and I had handled ourselves. Before she left, she handed me an envelope. "This is a copy of your grandfather's original will," she said. "Your mother has been telling people that cutting you off was always part of the family plan, but that's not true. Your grandfather specifically wanted you to inherit his personal investments, separate from the business holdings." I opened the envelope and found documentation showing that my grandfather had left me a substantial portfolio of individual stocks and bonds, completely independent of the family's commercial real estate empire. The investments were managed by a different firm, and had been growing steadily for years. "Why didn't I know about this?" I asked. "Because the inheritance doesn't become available until you turn 30, my grandmother explained. Your grandfather wanted to make sure you were old enough to handle the responsibility. Your mother has been the trustee, but she has no legal authority to change the terms of the bequest." I realized that my mother's threat to cut me off from the family money had been largely empty. She could remove me from her own will and from the family business holdings, but she couldn't touch the inheritance my grandfather had specifically designated for me. "There's about $800,000 in that portfolio now," my grandmother said quietly. "Your grandfather wanted to make sure you had financial independence, regardless of what happened with the rest of the family." After my grandmother left, Alden and I sat together processing everything we had learned. My family's financial crisis was worse than we had initially understood, but my personal financial security was actually better than I had realized. "It's ironic," I said to Alden. "My mother spent 2 years telling me I was financially dependent on the family, but it turns out I'm going to be fine regardless of what she does." "Your grandfather was a smart man," Alden replied. "He understood the importance of financial independence, especially for family members who might not toe the line on family expectations." Over the following weeks, we established our new normal. Alden continued his work with Meridian Capital Management, and his reputation in the business community grew as word spread about his role in the firm. I enrolled in a graduate program to finish my MBA, using the knowledge that my financial future was secure to pursue my own professional goals rather than worrying about family approval. We also began to rebuild selective relationships with family members who reached out to us. My uncle David called to apologize for his silence at the wedding, and to express his admiration for how we had handled the situation. My cousin Sarah visited several times, clearly relieved to have an excuse to distance herself from my mother's increasingly isolated social position. But the most significant change was in our relationship with each other. The crisis had stripped away all pretenses and social expectations, forcing us to rely entirely on our love and mutual respect. We had proven to ourselves and to everyone watching that our marriage was strong enough to withstand the worst kind of family pressure. 6 months after our wedding, we received news that my mother had filed for personal bankruptcy. The combination of lost income, legal fees from various business disputes, and the costs of trying to maintain her lifestyle without adequate funding had finally overwhelmed the family's resources. "How do you feel about that?" Alden asked when I told him about the bankruptcy filing. "I thought about it for a long time. I feel sad that it came to this," I said eventually. "But I also feel like justice has been served." She spent years using financial threats to control people's behavior. Now she's learning what it feels like to have no financial control at all. Our new equilibrium was built on honesty, mutual respect, and genuine partnership. We had learned that we could trust each other completely, even under the most difficult circumstances. We had proven that our love was stronger than family pressure, social expectations, or financial manipulation. Most importantly, we had established that our marriage would be based on our values and choices, not on anyone else's approval or disapproval. We were finally free to build the life we wanted together, without interference or control from people who didn't understand or respect what we had created. The game my mother had started at our wedding reception was finally over, and we had won more completely than we had ever dared to hope. 2 years have passed since that devastating night at the Grandmont Ballroom, and as I write this, I'm sitting in the home office of the house Alden and I bought together last spring. It's a modest but beautiful place in a quiet neighborhood, chosen not for its ability to impress others, but because it feels like home to us. The walls are decorated with photos from our travels, artwork we've collected together, and a few family pictures that represent the relationships we've chosen to maintain. On my desk sits a framed copy of a letter my grandmother wrote to me just before she passed away 6 months ago. In it she talked about the difference between family legacy and family love, and how she had finally learned that the latter was far more important than the former. She wrote, "True family legacy isn't about money or social status. It's about raising people who treat others with kindness and respect, regardless of their background or circumstances." The lessons from our wedding night have shaped every aspect of our lives since then. We learned that authentic relationships are built on mutual respect and genuine care, not on social status or financial leverage. We discovered that people's true character is revealed not in moments of success and comfort, but in how they treat others when they feel threatened or challenged. Most importantly, we learned that you cannot control other people's behavior, but you can always control your response to it. My mother chose cruelty and public humiliation as her weapons. We chose dignity, strategic thinking, and principled action as ours. The transformation in our relationship has been remarkable. Without the constant stress of family criticism and manipulation, we've been able to focus on building the partnership we both wanted. Alden has thrived professionally, not just at Meridian Capital Management, but also through his independent consulting work. His reputation for integrity and analytical excellence has made him one of the most sought-after business strategists in the region. I completed my MBA last year, and now work as a financial advisor, helping other young couples navigate the complex relationship between money and family expectations. Many of my clients are dealing with their own versions of what we experienced: family members who use financial pressure to control personal choices, or partners whose families judge them based on superficial criteria rather than character. The most rewarding part of my work is helping people understand that financial independence isn't just about having money. It's about having the freedom to make choices based on your values rather than other people's expectations. Too many people stay trapped in unhealthy family dynamics because they're afraid of losing financial security. What they don't realize is that the security they're clinging to often comes at the cost of their emotional well-being and personal authenticity. As for my mother, the consequences of her actions that night continue to shape her life. The bankruptcy was just the beginning. She has struggled to rebuild both her financial position and her social standing. Several former friends and business associates have distanced themselves from her, not necessarily because of what she did to me, but because her behavior revealed character traits they found concerning. She has reached out to me a few times over the past 2 years, usually when she's facing a new crisis or setback.
Her messages alternate between blame and pleading, sometimes accusing me of destroying the family, other times begging me to help repair the business relationships that her actions damaged. I've responded to a few of these communications, always briefly and professionally. I've made it clear that I'm willing to have a relationship with her if she's genuinely committed to change, but that any reconciliation would require authentic acknowledgement of the harm she caused, and consistent demonstration of different behavior over time. So far, she hasn't been willing or able to meet those conditions. Her apologies tend to focus on the consequences she's facing, rather than the pain she inflicted on others. She wants forgiveness that restores her access to our lives and Alden's business connections, but she doesn't want the accountability that would make such forgiveness meaningful. My father has been more successful at rebuilding our relationship, largely because he eventually acknowledged his role in enabling my mother's behavior. About a year ago, he called to apologize not just for failing to defend me that night, but for years of choosing peace over principle in family conflicts. He's been working with a therapist to understand how his conflict avoidance contributed to the family's dysfunction, and our conversations have become more honest and productive as a result. The broader lesson from our experience extends far beyond family relationships. In every area of life, there are people who mistake kindness for weakness, who interpret patience as permission to escalate their bad behavior. These people often assume that those who don't fight back immediately are powerless to defend themselves.
What they don't understand is that truly strong people often choose their battles carefully. They document patterns of behavior, build strategic alliances, and wait for the right moment to respond effectively. When they do act, it's not from emotion or impulse, but from careful planning and principled conviction. The most dangerous opponents are often the ones who appear the most harmless. The quiet person taking notes in the corner of the room might be the one who ultimately determines your fate. The modest, unassuming individual you're dismissing might be the person whose opinion carries the most weight with the people who matter. My mother learned this lesson the hardest way possible. She spent 2 years underestimating the man I married, assuming that his humble background and gentle demeanor meant he was powerless to challenge her authority. She never bothered to learn about his actual capabilities, professional relationships, or strategic thinking skills. When she finally pushed the situation to a breaking point, she discovered that she had been fighting someone who was not only smarter and more connected than she had realized, but who had been patiently documenting her behavior and preparing for exactly the kind of confrontation she initiated. The final truth that emerged from our wedding night crisis is this: respect and kindness should never be contingent on someone's ability to benefit you financially or socially. The way you treat people when you think they can't hurt you reveals everything about your character. And character, once revealed, is very difficult to rebuild. Today, Alden and I have the kind of marriage I had always hoped for but never dared to expect. We've built a life based on mutual support, honest communication, and shared values. We've learned to trust each other completely, not just with our hearts, but with our dreams, our fears, and our futures. We face challenges like any couple, but we face them as true partners, each bringing our strengths to support the relationship we've created together. The foundation we built through that crisis has proven strong enough to support whatever comes next. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if my mother had chosen differently that night. If she had welcomed Alden genuinely, celebrated our happiness, and focused on building relationships rather than maintaining control. Our family could have been stronger, our business relationships could have thrived, and she could have been part of the beautiful life Alden and I have created together. Instead, she chose cruelty over kindness, control over connection, and status over substance. Those choices cost her everything she claimed to value most, but they also freed us to build something better, something authentic, something that belongs entirely to us. That may be the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is showing you exactly who they are, even when it's painful to see. Once you have that clarity, you can make informed decisions about who deserves your trust, your energy, and your love. Never underestimate the quiet person taking notes. We might just be the ones holding the pen that writes your story. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.